Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something truly fascinating, though I have to admit, pretty sobering. We're going to take abstract textbook economic theory, the kind of concepts that look perfectly tidy on a classroom whiteboard, and watch them completely collide with the harsh, complex reality of Afghanistan's economy in 2025 and 2026. It's this massive paradox of macroeconomic numbers versus actual human survival. And it's a profoundly eye-opening way to see how the supposed rules of economics actually play out on the ground during a severe crisis.
Okay, let's dive into this. Today's roadmap covers scarcity and the market, the GDP growth illusion, the currency and trade paradox, labor shocks and survival, and finally, why countries stay poor.
Section 1. Scarcity and the market. The fundamental problem. To understand any economy, we really have to start with a baseline problem. And that problem is scarcity. It's the reality that we humans have seemingly unlimited wants, but our world has strictly limited resources. I mean, think about it. If there were infinite pizza, economics literally wouldn't exist. But there isn't. There's not enough food, not enough houses, and definitely not enough slightly larger TVs than your cousin has. Because of this absolute limit, we're forced to make choices.
But let's step away from the lighthearted examples for a second. When you put scarcity and human choices into a box and shake it up, you get a market. And as our source material points out perfectly, markets do not care about fairness or feelings or if you stubbed your toe this morning. They just respond to price signals. The famous invisible hand you always hear about? It's really just math, desire, and desperation working together in silence. And in Afghanistan right now, that desperation is incredibly real.
When we take that abstract textbook theory of scarcity and apply it to Afghanistan today, the results are just staggering. Check out these numbers. 75% of the Afghan population is subsistence insecure. That means 3 out of every 4 people cannot meet their most basic survival needs. We're talking food, safe water, and shelter. Scarcity here isn't about luxury goods at all. It's the harsh reality that over 80% of Afghan households are currently taking on debt just to buy their daily food.
Section 2. The GDP growth illusion. Macro versus micro reality.
So how do we actually measure the size of these markets we just talked about? Usually we look to GDP, or gross domestic product. The standard by-the-book definition is the total value of all final goods and services produced in a country in a given year. In a normal environment, this number goes up when you have more capital, better tech, higher labor productivity, or honestly, just more people making and buying things within your borders.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how deceptive those numbers can be. On paper, Afghanistan's macro-level figures show a 4.8% real GDP expansion going into 2026. Normally, we'd celebrate that, right? A growing economy is a good thing. But here's the illusion. That 4.8% growth is completely swallowed up by a massive, completely unsustainable 11% demographic boom, which is being driven heavily by returning refugees. The economy is growing, sure, but the population is exploding more than twice as fast.
Because the population grew by double digits, the actual wealth of individuals drastically shrank. GDP per capita, which is the amount of economic value per person, actually declined by 5.6%, dropping down to a nominal $448. This proves an absolutely vital economic lesson. Raw growth on a national spreadsheet isn't always good growth for the people actually living through it.
Section 3. The currency and trade paradox, a devastating paradox.
Okay, let's talk about trade and money. In theory, money is just a medium of exchange to avoid having to trade a goat for some Wi-Fi. It acts as a unit of account and a store of value. Actually, scratch that. A better way to say it, as our source material so colorfully puts it, is that money is economic lube. It keeps the gears of trade spinning. But when we examine Afghanistan's current financial setup, we see that those gears are dangerously jammed up.
$11.3 billion. That is the shocking scale of Afghanistan's 2025 trade deficit. To put that massive number into perspective, that deficit is equivalent to roughly 60% of the country's entire nominal GDP. 60%. They are relying so heavily on elevated imports just to sustain their booming population, all while traditional exports, like textiles and agricultural goods, are literally being choked off by regional border closures.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most fascinating paradoxes we're looking at today. You would naturally think a strong currency is a good thing, right? Well, the Afghani actually strengthened to around 69.7 per US dollar by mid-2026. That was driven by a tight supply of physical cash and folks sending money home. But this so-called strong currency is actively destructive here. Why? Because it makes imported goods cheaper, which just widens that massive trade deficit we just talked about. And simultaneously, it makes Afghan exports far too expensive, rendering them completely uncompetitive in regional markets. It's a textbook example of a strong currency totally strangling a fragile economy.
Section 4. Labor shocks and survival. A market overwhelmed. Let's pivot from the flow of goods to the flow of people. In a sterile economics textbook, a labor market is simply a place where the product is human time. Firms provide the demand, workers provide the supply, and the price is paid in wages. The standard rule is pretty simple. An increase in the supply of labor should naturally equal lower wages. But what happens when the supply side experiences a sudden, unprecedented shock that completely breaks the model?
Well, you get a number like this, 5 million. Between 2023 and 2026, nearly 5 million Afghan refugees poured back into the country. This was largely due to deportations and changing policies in neighboring Pakistan and Iran. Now, this isn't just a minor shift on a supply curve. This is a massive demographic and labor shock that the local, already deeply strained economy simply cannot absorb.
The human cost of this sudden oversupply of labor is absolutely catastrophic. In the provinces hosting the most returnees, a mere 3% have formal employment. An astounding 92% of these returning citizens lack the basic necessities for life. And to make this disaster even worse, total international aid to Afghanistan fell by 16.5% in 2025. That drop in funding directly forced the closure of over 440 medical clinics. The free market just cannot fix a gap this wide on its own.
Section 5. Why countries stay poor. The structural traps.
You know, development economics teaches us that capital and trade alone don't instantly make a country rich. Very often, poor countries get structurally trapped. As the theory explains, if you're poor, you can't save. If you can't save, you can't invest. And if you can't invest, you can't grow, so you just stay poor. It really is exactly like trying to climb out of a deep pit, but the rope is completely covered in butter.
And when a nation is at the very bottom of that pit, facing a 7.6% inflation spike and severe droughts affecting 64% of the whole country, the ways people cope become unimaginable. Families are forced into devastating negative coping mechanisms. We're talking about pulling children out of school for labor, arranging early marriages, and in some documented extreme cases, selling body organs just to survive the day.
So, looking ahead to any hope of true economic recovery, there are three major structural bottlenecks blocking the path. First, and absolutely critical, are the severe restrictions on women. By systematically removing half the population from the formal workforce and higher education, the economy's long-term growth ceiling is fundamentally, permanently capped. Step 2 is a total lack of infrastructure, with no external grants coming in to build modern roads or power grids. And Step 3 is severe geopolitical isolation, essentially cutting them off from the rest of global finance.
So the crucial point here is this. Yes, the state has actually managed to prevent a total macroeconomic collapse through strict border tax enforcement, which brought domestic revenue up to nearly 20% of GDP. That's true. But a stabilized balance sheet does not equal a functioning society. A paralyzed formal banking system and zero foreign direct investment mean Afghanistan's vast mineral wealth, things like copper, lithium, and rare earth elements, remains completely untapped. It's just sitting there, useless to the people who need it most.
Which brings us to the grim bottom-line reality. Afghanistan's economy in 2026 is surviving, but its people are not. Textbook economic stability, like a strong currency or balanced state revenues, means absolutely nothing if that stability is built on a deepening cycle of high population poverty and daily human desperation. We started this explainer by talking about the rules of the market and that famous invisible hand that guides supply and demand, but I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If an economy mathematically stabilizes, but 75% of its people cannot survive without aid or taking on debt, is the invisible hand actually working? Or is it time to rethink how we measure the true success of an economy? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the numbers.